Transmitter device activated. Coordinates set for Earth 2.
Hey everyone, welcome back to a very special episode of the Earth 2 podcast. The podcast that explores the origins and development of the DC Comics multiverse and the legacy of their Golden Age characters through the Silver and the Bronze Ages of comics. I'm Peter Watson.
And I'm David Steele. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Yes, legacy is the focus again this week. We're doing the lead story from issue 87 of Green Lantern, co-starring Green Arrow, published on the 21st of October 1971, 1 week exactly before my dad's 31st birthday.
There you are.
God bless you, Sandy. It's an interesting one. This issue is the first appearance of Green Lantern John Stewart. And, you know, we're going to be up front and say, two middle-aged white guys from Scotland talking about a black superhero. We're going to be as respectful as we possibly can.
It's a very race-themed story, so we're going to be
There's a couple of points that
cautious.
we're not going to read the full dialogue. We might smooth over some of the edges because, frankly, we feel a little uncomfortable reading it, and we're also aware that, you know, it's not about us, put it this way, this story. It's the second of Hal Jordan's backups, as it were, to be introduced. It's Hal Jordan's alternatives. We're going to talk a little bit later on about the creation of the character and such like. But before we get in, Peter, can you remember when you first encountered John Stewart, Green Lantern?
I think it's around about the Dave Gibbons era when he was on, because you had John Stewart, Kat Matsui was hanging about at that point as well. Predator was a character in it as well, who's like an offshoot of Carl Ferris, which was really quite weird and bizarre. Yeah, so around about then, I would think. And he was the main Green Lantern at the time. Hal Jordan had quit at that time.
That's right.
And he was for quite some time.
It's John that's the active Green Lantern during Crisis on Infinite Earths, as far as Earth 1 is concerned. And again, this is where we make the point that Hal Jordan does not appear within the pages of the 12-issue Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Nope, not at all.
Obviously, he's involved in the Green Lantern crossover issues. We'll do them as well, don't worry, listeners. But yeah, I think the first time I encountered John would have been one of those fabled trips to the post office down the road from my granny's where I bought issue 60 or 61, whichever it was, of All-Star Squadron. And there were some issues of Green Lantern Corps. I first connected with him properly during the Mosaic storyline.
Oh, really? Okay.
Because that was when I was kind of feeling my way into reading DC Comics at that point. Because my friend Scott was picking up Green Lantern. I bought the trade paperback of Emerald Dawn, and Scott borrowed it and really enjoyed it. And I don't have that anymore. I don't know what it is. I don't know if I lent it to someone when I was working in HMV. So Chris or Paul, if you're listening, if you've got that book, can I have it back? Scott had read this and started reading, I think he read Emerald Dawn 2 and started picking up the regular book, and I started picking up the regular book. So that was the first time I really properly became acquainted with John. And it's interesting because John, I think for a lot of people, he's almost their default Green Lantern because he was the one that was used in the Justice League cartoon.
Yep, absolutely.
Massive sort of exposure that way.
For a whole generation.
Yeah, it's crazy to think how long ago that series actually was now. Like 20 years it was going on. And we've had the recent confirmation, of course, that he's going to be featured in this new Green Lantern TV series that's happening in the new era of James Gunn. I like John. He's never been my favourite Green Lantern. I'm not sure why. He was always a bit too worthy. Guy was funnier. Hal was a bit more dynamic to me, and he was the first one I counted. And Kyle was my age, so I agree. You know,
sure. Yeah, I can understand.
I like John, but he's always that to me. He's always that air of the reliable guy in the corner.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Know what I mean?
I've never hugely clicked with John because I feel that sometimes writers don't. Sometimes they write him as the architect guy, sometimes they write him as the soldier guy.
Oh, yeah.
And they never really seem to get a decent balance.
Yeah, I was a bit sort of, I remember, like, was it during War of the Green Lanterns, in the period before the New 52, I suddenly, because there was a storyline where he was in a wheelchair for a while, wasn't he? I seem to remember, around about the early 2000s.
Right.
Did he end up being a Dark Star as well at one point?
I don't recall offhand, I'll
I
be
think
honest.
He did. I'm sure he did. And I remember being surprised when this background of him being in the army was sort of suddenly foregrounded, because I thought, no, when did that happen? He was the architect guy. He was, that was the whole point. It was this break of showing a positive, representation for a black character rather than, just a kind of a jive talking Luke Cage type guy.
And also it gave the aspect of he could mentally construct more interesting things because he's an architect.
Of course.
He could see designs in his head and they would actually come into being.
Yeah. And of course they did that with Kyle when he was as the illustrator, of course, which is interesting parallel. So anyway, listeners, very important comic, as we say. This comes towards the end of the Neal Adams, Denny Neal run on Green Lantern and Green Arrow. Famous now as the hard-travelling heroes and for bringing social realism to the GL stories. That obviously started with issue 76, published in early 1970. Issue 87, one of the last issues. There's only 2 more issues after this. Issue 88, which is an all reprint issue, which is a nice Neal Adams cover, which is a nice Alan Scott figure on it. I'm going to put the cover for that one up on the socials alongside this one as well, just because it's so cool. It has an previously unpublished Alan Scott story, which we will be dealing with in due course, so don't worry about that. After this issue 87, there's the all reprint 88, and then issue 89 is the final one in this run. So we're coming in at the tail end of the Hard Travelling Heroes. But it's nice that we can justify touching on one of them. So, it is our 30-second dedicated, focused, highlighted Neal Adams cover.
Wow.
Peter's going to tell you all about it.
It's a fantastic image in the cover. Up the top, again, we're at that strange period where there's not a proper DC logo. Instead, you have a circle that says DC, Green Lantern, Green Arrow. And you've got Hal Jordan and Ollie Queen's masked faces within that.
A couple of floating heads.
Yep. Then, of course, we have the Green Lantern right in the middle at the top with the banner. And coming out from that is lit up Green Lantern, co-starring Green Arrow. And the arrow that's coming off the W on Green Arrow is actually pointing at the small circle that says 48 pages, only 25 cents. I like that. It's almost as if it's highlighting it.
Yeah, that's hilarious. I'm sure it's purely accidental.
Oh, yes.
It's very, very funny.
And, of course, we have a really stark image on the cover. We have the plain white background with 2 images on it, which makes it really pop. It's fantastic. On the ground, we have what seems to be an injured or comatose Hal Jordan. He's been lifted up by another figure in a Green Lantern costume, and it's the aforementioned John Stewart.
Yep.
And he's saying to us, the reader, with his ring glowing on his fist, "They whipped the Green Lantern. Now let him try me." And we've got some text that says, "Introducing an unforgettable new character who really means it when he warns, 'Beware my power.'" Then we have more information on the other stories in this issue. It also says, "Plus a new life for Green Arrow in What Can One Man Do?" And a classic extra, Earth's first Green Lantern.
Yeah, which is an Abin Sur story, which is a lot of fun. Yeah, the Ollie backup's also by the same creative team.
Yes.
It's a very dynamic cover. On the socials this week, I will post a few homage covers which have been done over the years.
Good.
It doesn't mess, does it?
No, it certainly grabs your attention. You would buy this off the shelf straight away.
Now, John's not the first black DC superhero of sorts. You know, there's Mal from the Teen Titans, a couple of the Kirby characters, but he's the first black legacy character. And we're going to talk a little bit about that once we've done the story, the importance of that.
Yes.
So, yeah, we'll just jump in. It's a shorter story than usual. Hopefully we'll get through it all right. So we have an opening splash panel with a lovely green tint that shows Hal Jordan in the midst of charging his power battery. Lots of captioning that reads,
"Somewhere in Southern California this autumn day, Green Lantern is performing his familiar, almost sacred ritual, touching his power ring to the battery from which it draws its mystic energy. Suddenly the floor beneath his feet buckles. The air is immediately filled with dust. The walls bend and break. There is a sound like the shattering of 1,000,000 huge china plates. And in that instant, the Emerald Crusader realizes a soul-chilling truth. This is an earthquake!"
Another small caption tells the story is by
Denny O'Neil, art by Neal Adams and Dick Giordano, and edited by Julie Schwartz.
And we're told the name of this story, large letters,
Beware my power!
And the first panel then on page 2, Hal has left his building. He's flying through the air. We can see the disruption underneath. The streets cracked open, cars are in disarray, traffic lights have fallen over. He flies over. Hal is thinking, the tremors seem to have stopped, and the policemen and firemen apparently have the situation under control. Luckily, the quake was slight. He flies up into the sky in panel 2. Still, it won't hurt to have a look around. Somebody may need my help.
At that moment, outside the city...
Yes, we're at a bridge, which has obviously been broken in the middle. We can see it comes down from the mountain, continues into the city, but a huge central section of this connecting part of the bridge has been broken by the earthquake. There's a little girl perched on an outcrop of this broken section. How she wandered out there, I'm not sure. You can see some other children standing on the bridge watching, and there's a young man, kind of short red hair, purple shirt, brown trousers, and he's calling to this little girl, and he's saying, "Susie, honey, listen to me. Sweetie, you've got to come closer. I can't come to you. My weight's too much for what's left of the bridge. We'd both fall into the canyon."
I'm scared, Mr. Gardner.
We get a close-up in the final panel of page 2, and we realise it's a very familiar figure. It's Guy Gardner, who we met when we did Green Lantern issue 59 at the tail end of 2021. And we'll get a reminder of Guy's status as the story continues. He's thinking in this panel, "Poor kid, she's frightened out of her mind, frozen with fear, which leaves me no choice. This thing may go any second, but I've got to chance it." First panel of page 3.
While a dozen yards distant...
Yeah, Green Lantern Hal Jordan alights beside the children. We can see their school bus in the background. So obviously Susie must have got off the bus and wandered away. As he lands, Green Lantern says, "Anything I can do for you kids?"
"Not us, Green Lantern, but Mr. Gardner and Susie Delancey. They're stuck out there."
"Mr. Gardner was taking us on a class trip in the bus when..."
Before the child could finish her story, the screech of rending girders tortures the stillness as...
Yes, and we see in panel 2 that part of the bridge has given way. Susie falls, but also the school bus tips forward with a whamp. Hits Guy Gardner square in the back. In panel 3, Green Lantern catches Susie in a power ring beam, uses another power ring beam to catch the school bus, and then creates a stretcher for who we now realise is Guy Gardner. Indeed, Hal exclaims, "That's Guy Gardner!" In the first panel of page 4, he's brought Guy up onto the bridge, got him laid down, and he says, "You hurt bad, Guy?" "Green Lantern, I didn't expect you. Yeah, pretty badly broken up. Bus hit me full. Body feels like a balloon with a load of busted light bulbs rattling around inside." And a little asterisk in this panel reminds us that
Guy Gardner, the alternate choice to be Earth's Green Lantern, as revealed in Earth's Other Green Lantern, in the March 1968 Green Lantern, or indeed the previous episode of this podcast.
Yes. So, a slow dissolve.
Shortly at a nearby hospital...
And we see Hal Jordan, Green Lantern, talking to a medical man who says,
"It's a miracle your friend survived at all. If he hadn't been in perfect health, well, as it is, he'll be bedridden for at least 6 months."
Green Lantern leaves the hospital. The next panel, very moody lit panel, as he thinks, "Not a good situation. Guy's my successor, the only other deserving one on Earth, fearless and honest enough to activate a power ring. I've been counting on him, letting my duties slip while I got my personal life together." Does that imply that Guy has been active as a GL? Interesting. Hal continues to think, knowing if I became strung out, Guy could take over, but now, and then suddenly, he's interrupted by a vision of one of the Guardians of Oa, who says,
"Hear me, Green Lantern of Earth."
And a caption leads us from panel 4 into panel 5.
Abruptly, the Emerald Crusader's thoughts are interrupted by the telepathic image of one of the immortal Guardians.
Yes, the Guardian continues,
"We have witnessed Guy Gardner's injury. It is our wish to designate another substitute for yourself."
"I concur. But who?" And a slow dissolve takes us to the top of page 5.
"Who indeed have the Guardians chosen? To find the answer, come with us to a certain urban ghetto."
Listeners, we're going to be as tactful as we can, but it's really interesting. I mean, as we say, we're in this position of two middle-aged white guys from Scotland, and this issue addresses a lot of problems in America, which are obviously still going on. You don't have to be daft to say that, but we're going to be very careful how we handle this, because it's very sensitive. A couple of young black men sat in the street. It looks like they're playing cards or something. It's not too clear. And a couple of police officers are hassling them. In the background, we can see some closed shops that have lots of graffiti and stuff. There's some take a drink. There's a couple of dustbins lying in front of them. Some more rubbish in the streets. And the policeman is saying to the two young men, "Move along. You haven't got a game permit. And besides, you're blocking the sidewalk." One of the boys says.
Let us alone."
And then off camera, another voice says,
"Good advice. Yeah, fine advice, officer."
And we're greeted by another young black gentleman, very smartly dressed actually. He's a kind of green waistcoat over an orange shirt and a greeny-blue neckerchief, who continues talking to the policeman where he says,
"Maybe you ought to check your law book and find out if they really need a permit to play dominoes. As for blocking, wouldn't hurt anybody to walk around them."
"You want trouble?" says the policeman.
"I don't want it, but I'm not about to run from it either. And anyway, I kinda doubt you're man enough to give it, even with your nightstick."
Senior policeman here, the one that's just been talking, older, thicker set guy with white hair, he's not really into it. He swells up the next panel saying, "Blast them, they got no respect." And his friend grabs his arm, quietens him, and says,
"Fred, respect has to be earned. The way you acted, you didn't earn a nickel's worth."
We shift our perspective to the next panel, up on the rooftop overlooking this scene that's been going on, and Hal Jordan, in his Green Lantern uniform, is standing with one of the Guardians, looking down. Hal says to the Guardian, "That's the man you want to trust with a power ring, the finest weapon ever devised?"
"He has all due qualifications, and we are not interested in your petty bigotries."
"Hey, that's not what I meant. Maybe he's brave, honest, and has the right kind of mind. But it's obvious he also has a chip on his shoulder the size of the Rock of Gibraltar. Frankly, I think you're making a mistake." With that, Green Lantern Hal dives off the side of the building, down towards the street, as the Guardian says,
"Perhaps, nevertheless, our judgment stands."
A slow dissolve.
Later, in a nearby candy store, Green Lantern finishes his explanation and...
Green Lantern sat with this chap who we haven't actually had his name yet. The man who stood up to the policeman. We can see comics in the right behind him.
Yay.
So another guy polishing a glass in the background. And Green Lantern Hal is in the process of finishing a spiel, obviously, as he's saying, "So I'm asking, you interested?"
Considering jobs aren't exactly plentiful for black architects in the land of the free these days, and I haven't worked in weeks, so time's not a problem. Sure, I'll try your gig. Might be a laughs being a superhero. My mama named me John Stewart, Square John to my friends. Only from now on, maybe you better call me Black Lantern.
That's interesting, obviously, because that's a couple of years before Black Goliath.
Oh, yes.
In Marvel, which was eventually they softened that and became Giant Man.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, caption in for panel 4.
Next, the young black man begins a crash course in the mysteries of the Green Lantern Corps.
Green Lantern Hal and John Stewart standing on a rooftop. Hal's explaining. Energy is broadcast by tachyon transmission from the master power battery on the planet Oa to these batteries. Your ring can only absorb 24 hours worth at a time. You must remember to recharge it.
Care to demonstrate?
We have a ritual, an oath. It goes like this. And Hal places his battery on a chimney stack and says, "In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light." First panel of page 7, John says,
"Man, that's pretty corny, except for the part that says beware my power. I do dig those words."
And we see that John is now wearing a power ring. It flashes. In panel 2, Green Lantern Hal says, "We may as well begin your field training. You'll need a proper outfit." And he gestures with his power ring, and John's street clothes are transformed into the full Green Lantern uniform. John says,
"These aren't any threads James Brown would wear, but they beat my usual Salvation Army special."
And he continues in the next panel.
"Only one thing. I won't wear any mask. This black man lets it all hang out. I've got nothing to hide."
And he tosses the mask over his shoulder, and there's a tss sound effect. It looks so Green Lantern Hal burns it up with his power ring. In the next panel, the caption says,
"For hours they practice in the sky above the city."
Yeah, we can see them turning loops, flying around. Hal is saying, "You have a real talent, John. You've quickly mastered the skills necessary to sustain flight."
"It's easy compared to the skills needed to reach my pad after dark. Those muggers, something else."
And then in the final panel of page 7, we see where they've flown to.
"Hey, look down there, at the airport."
Must be a celebrity arriving.
"Right. And I know which celebrity. What say we drop in for a while?"
And we can see that there's a crowd as this plane arrives. We can see some police, and there's some people carrying signs. One of them that says, "Welcome, Senator." A couple of others, but we can't really read them, to be honest. In the first panel of page 8, it's obvious that the police have lost control of keeping the crowd back who are here to greet the Senator. First caption says,
"Recklessly, the crowd surges toward the plane in the path of a fuel truck. The driver swerves.
Yeah, there's a massive screech of brakes.
A tire hits an oil slick, and suddenly the truck is out of control, plummeting toward a heedless knot of people."
Yeah, the two Green Lanterns fly down in panel 2. John says,
"You get those people out of harm's way. I'll see to the wheels."
And Hal is gesturing with his ring and create a massive, weird cage
Yes.
to corral up the crowd. And John is gesturing, creating a brace which will slow the progress of the truck. The caption for the final panel of page 8.
A gush of thick oil spurts forth, showering the spectators, including Senator Jeremiah Clutcher.
Yes, we see John's maybe been a little too enthusiastic. He's actually pierced the side of the oil truck. And as the caption says, we can see a little squirt spraying over some of the people coming down the stairs from the aeroplane. Now, first panel of page 9, we see the Senator and his friends wiping the muck from their face. The Senator says, "Ah, an outrage! Someone will pay!" And then off camera, a voice says,
"Hey, baby, haven't I seen you picking cotton someplace?"
Yes, in panel 2, John is standing in front of the Senator and laughing at him, basically. And the implication there is clear that because the Senator has an oil spray in his face, that his face is now has been blackened by that, and that's obviously what John's referring to. And panel 3, we can see the Senator waving a fist at John and Hal as they fly off. Hal says, "John, you were stupid and irresponsible."
"So I maybe missed my aim with the power beam and the Senator got a little blackened." What's to worry about? I've been dark all my life and I'm surviving.
I don't believe you missed.
Okay, I didn't. Listen, Whitey, that windbag wants to be president. He's a racist. And he figures on climbing to the White House on the backs of my people.
Two lads are flying higher in the next panel as Hal says, "You think he's a racist? Tough. Nobody appointed you judge. You need a lesson, and I'm the guy who's teacher. As of now, I'm assigning you to guard Senator Clutcher. And if anything happens to him, you've had it. One last thing. Don't call me Whitey. Something in that reminds me of that bit about he who is without sin casting the first stone." A slow dissolve to page 10.
An hour later, at a stadium near the city limits.
Big long panel takes up the length of the page. We can see a sign that reads, "Tonight, Senator Clutcher." We can see the crowd walking in. The caption for panel 2.
The senator speaks to a rapt audience.
And listeners, we're not going to read out what he says, because it's abhorrent, even in the context of the story.
Yep.
We're not going to say it. He has a right hand raised, and he basically... You can look it up for yourself.
Spouting racist rhetoric.
Yes, that's a tidy way of saying it. Right, panel 3. We see the two Green Lanterns standing on the roof of the stadium. We hear the tail end of one part of the senator's speech as we hear him saying, "They can't appreciate the finer things." Hal says, "He's babbling nonsense, all right. Such stupidity is the price we pay for free speech."
Yes, sir, I am getting sick to my stomach.
Nothing's changed, has it?
Nope.
52 years ago this comic was published.
Yep, and I know someone
Pretty
who would
much.
sell out that stadium instantly these days for the same spiel.
Absolutely. Panel 4 is interesting. We're down behind the senator. He's being fired upon. There's a couple of bam-bams, and a young black man who has the gun says,
"You'll die for your lies!"
Caption for the next panel,
The listener sits stunned, shocked, except for Green Lantern and his new partner.
Hal leaps into action saying, "The assassin is escaping! Move!" John says,
"Not me. You go chasing him. I'm leaving."
First panel, page 11. Hal has flown down and managed to catch the assassin. He creates a power ring structure which wraps around the ankles of the guy, makes him fall to the ground, dropping the gun. Hal is thinking, "I'll tend to Stewart, shove the power ring down his throat after I nail the gunman." Funny, the gunman saw me coming yet didn't use his pistol. In panel 2, the guy's standing up. With a thud, Hal punches him out, thinking, "I'll ask why when he wakes up."
Meanwhile, in the parking lot outside, a policeman tenses, sensing trouble, unaware he's framed in the sights of a submachine gun.
Yeah, the machine gun's in the foreground of the panel. We see a policeman mooching around further into the image. He's thinking,
Sure got quiet inside. The windbag must have run out of wind. At least I hope that's the reason.
in the final panel, page 11, the machine gun starts to fire, but thankfully, a Green Lantern power ring construct beams down from the sky and shoves the policeman out of the way. A voice says,
"Watch it!"
and in the first panel of page 12, we get a close-up of the machine gunner. He's a white guy, a green shirt, slick back brown hair, and another power ring construct comes in and bends back the barrel of his gun. The bearer of that Green Lantern ring says,
"We got us a junior grade Al Capone lurking behind the cars. Cat hasn't heard choppers went out of style with the roaring 20s.
"Hey!" exclaims the bad guy as his barrel gets bent. And then in panel 2, we see the bad guy being borne up into the air in a solid rectangular Green Lantern power construct. As its bearer, John Stewart, is saying,
Well, he won't be using that one again, nor much of anything else."
in panel 3, we see the policeman who John saved. Standing with John, the policeman says,
"Thanks, fella. You saved my hide."
John says,
"Don't thank me. Thank this ever-loving ring. Best trinket a man ever wore."
you can see the bad guy standing beside them, trapped in this power ring construct. Off camera, Hal cries, "John Stewart!"
My name's Green Lantern II, remember?
Hal is in a rage. He's grasped John by the front of his uniform and he's saying, "No, it's not. You're a disgrace to your uniform, your ring, and yourself. I warned you."
Steady. I don't enjoy being manhandled. Listen, you round up the pistol that Cat fired at Clutcher and meet me inside. You're gonna have your own lesson, teacher.
A slow dissolve.
Then,
Final panel, page 12, we see Hal with the senator, a couple of policemen, and the young black man that Hal fought for the pistol earlier on. And John is saying,
Thing is, I spotted the pistol packer with the senator this afternoon at the airport. Likewise, I spotted the machine gun artist. I asked myself, why is one shooting and the other missing? The answer is in the gun you're holding, Green Lantern.
in the first panel of page 13, we see Hal with the pistol. He's opened the barrel and some bullets fall out. And Hal looks alarmed and says, "It's filled with blanks." Then a very moodily underlit John says in panel 2,
Yeah, it's a frame. While Pistol Pete was blasting the senator with blanks, The real killing was supposed to take place in the parking lot. That way it looks like the blacks are on a rampage and Clutcher is everybody's hero. Then Clutcher waltzes into the presidency, and pretty soon this country is ripped apart with civil war.
Senator Clutcher stands there looking impassive as Hal says, "Clutcher, you're beneath contempt. I'm certain your colleagues in Congress will bounce you where you belong." And a slow dissolve for the final panel.
Shortly.
And we're back with Hal and John and a power battery sat up on the roof of the stadium as Hal says, "I'll admit, John, your style turned me off. I was more than ready to stick blame on you."
No sweat, pal. Only style isn't important any more than colour.
And a caption rounds out the story saying,
"Where or when, no man can say, but rest assured, John Green Lantern Stewart will return."
And John Stewart will return to the podcast eventually. We will see him again. So a very straightforward story, especially compared to the introduction of Guy Gardner, very much more straightforward. And it's able to let John demonstrate and show his worth and
Yes.
show that he's capable, and Hal maybe learn to chill slightly.
Absolutely, yes. I found this one really interesting from a Green Lantern continuity point of view. You've got the Guardians telling Hal he needs a backup, right, which we haven't really had before.
That's very true, yes.
Whereas when they introduced Guy Gardner, Guy was unaware he was supposed to be the backup.
Yeah.
And at no point did we have a training montage with Hal and Guy Gardner.
That's true. I mean, all we had was that Hal watched a big fancy television that showed him What If.
Yeah, which was bizarre. And then
Hal made the point of becoming friends with him, making his acquaintance. So it's possible that off camera, maybe we did see some of that.
Yeah, maybe something did happen, that the reader hasn't seen yet.
When we write our DC comic, we'll fill in the gap.
Guy Gardner, The Lost Years.
Yeah.
But certainly that's not what the focus of the story is. The focus of the story is in John Stewart and his introduction and some interesting socially relevant content again from this winning combination of Denny O'Neil and Neal Adams.
Yeah, I mean, it's very well done. It's very subtle. Like, black kids getting hassled with the police. John steps in. Hal's like, "Oh God, you sure this guy's got some beef?" But then he gets to know him. And it's true, again, we keep saying this, we're not really are we qualified to talk on the race issue? But it is still a thing, it's still an issue. There's no two ways about it.
It's very well written for the time, I think, especially John's dialogue, for example. The shorthand stereotype for an African-American at this stage would have been having him say ain't every second word or say nothing, basically dropping the G's off the ings. But his dialogue reads very smartly. You can tell he's an assertive, educated person who's very forthright and has this sense of social justice within him. Very intelligent. It's really well written and a really good introduction for a character.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're at this point. I think Luke Cage first appears in 1972. Luke Cage, Hero for Hire #1, and Luke, they were probably trying to make him relevant, or he became almost a caricature sort of straight away. Christmas and all that, and and I think the character Black Lightning, the superhero Black Lightning, of course, not the horse who we met in our Johnny Thunder episode a long time ago.
Or the future horse who we also met.
Black Lightning was almost a kind of a parody of that, because you've got you have another articulate and educated black man who dresses up almost in a caricature with a wig and a deep cut shirt and stuff. Yes. And there's that famous issue of the JLA where they lampoon that style of almost comedy talking, which John helpfully doesn't do. It's a great introduction for John. I mean, part of me sort of thinks it would have been really brave of DC just to have Hal go on sabbatical for 6 months and have John just take over. I wish they'd had the balls to do it.
Back then,
really interesting.
I mean, we know that there wasn't much life left in this title as it was.
Well, after this one, there's only one new issue before the cancellation. And this is the thing, like the Hard Travelling Heroes are so well regarded nowadays and has been for a while. But at the time, it just didn't seem to be, or at least they weren't reporting the numbers for them to keep it going. It's fascinating. And I'm reminded of, remember some of the resistance that we had when we were reading The Spectre. Some of the letters that we read then where people were they weren't really into the socially relevant sort of progressive sort of stuff. They just wanted cheap thrills. And I wonder if maybe that was a side effect of it. Maybe they were literally ahead of their time. There's not too much more to say about the story. It's so economical. It's done. It's a very, very important part of the Green Lantern legacy.
Yeah. One of the things I did really enjoy was John's even got a goofy quality to him, because that scene of the two of them in the candy store, and he's having a milkshake and he's literally got a milk moustache.
Yes.
On that panel. as he's just, being kind of folksy and homey. No, it's just a really cute kind of extra character detail saying, square John to my friend. So basically he is kind of like...
He's aware he's a bit of a dork.
Yeah, which is, again, a wonderful character trait. He's not the stereotype that you saw everywhere.
Yeah.
Back then, in
well, that's the
film
thing.
and television,
He's just a guy, and that's the whole point. He's just a man.
Yeah.
I mean, I was always impressed by. Do you remember Land of the Giants? Remember Dan, the co-pilot, and the Giants? He was. He was another similar character, like a capable.
Yeah.
Just a man. The fact he was black was irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's a good bit of positive representation of having him there.
Yeah, we have commented on this earlier on, but to give the listeners a bit more feedback on our situation, when I was growing up, there was not a single person of colour in my high school for all the years I was there.
Right.
It's only when I was an adult and stuff that I actually did meet and get to know people, and that's not through choice. It's just that was the population in the area. It was literally.
Yeah. We had a mixed race family in our street, but again, I don't think we had any black kids in our high school either.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure how different that is in Paisley now, because obviously I think Britain is a little more integrated than it used to be. I mean, there was some horrible times in the 80s where riots in Brixton and what have you, and a lot of trouble in various places in the 70s as well. I hope it's a lot better, but we both know in our hearts that in a lot of ways it isn't. And again, as I keep saying, it's easy for you and me just to sit here and feel a bit holier than thou. But it's the race thing is never going to go away, and it doesn't matter how many episodes of Star Trek or how many comics that touch on it. It's until people just can just accept that people are people, it's still going to be a problem.
I mean, literally, the week of recording, Black History Month has just started.
Of course.
And the DC specials come out for that. And literally, this could be reprinted there and just put on as a new story. Because it does feel so contemporary, it does feel so now. It's horrible, but we've not learned much from that.
Yeah, and we'd encourage our listeners to pick a copy of that up, because it features a story with future All-Star Squadron member Amazing Man.
Ooh, exciting.
Which is great. And obviously, we'll probably talk a lot more about this sort of thing when we get to his first appearance in a few years' time. Now, Pete, so you did a little bit of digging and research on the sort of history and introduction and creation of John Stewart, didn't you?
Yes, I remember years ago listening to Fat Man and Batman, the Kevin Smith podcast, and he was interviewing Neal Adams, and they talked a bit about the creation of John Stewart, and it led me to do a bit more digging, and I found a really interesting article from Back issue 8.
Right.
Back issue 8 from Two Morrows came out in 2005, and there's a whole feature on John Stewart. Now, there's an interview that's with Denny O'Neil, and also there's a second interview that's with Neal Adams. Now, they kind of conflict each other slightly, but you get the general gist between the two of them. Denny O'Neill's tells about the history of John Stewart, and he said, I run into this problem all the time. It was 30 years ago, no one was taking notes. Nobody thought that anyone would remember the character beyond 4 or 5 years. With the Green Lantern Green Arrow series, Neal Adams and I were kind of aware we were pushing the envelope out a little bit, and it was just a consensus between the two of us and Julie Schwartz that we needed a black character. The rationale for being a Green Lantern made it very easy to create an African-American Green Lantern, because there's no reason that a guy like that couldn't get the ring. Denny also goes on to say ideally he would have been written by a black writer, but there were virtually none in the field back then. I always feel a little awkward when I'm doing an ethnic character because it's not Irish Catholic, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do. And to be honest, I'm glad that he did, otherwise I wouldn't have this character.
Yeah.
Because he is a really strong, interesting character and a very positive role model.
Well, I think so. Role model representation. I mean, there's the quote from Neal Adams on John's creation as well, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Neal does go into it in a bit more detail. He says that he was sitting with Julie Schwartz and he was talking about the idea of doing another Green Lantern. Of course, Julie showed how stupid it was because someone had already done that with a guy named Guy Gardner. I asked Julie about that character and he pulled out a comic book and showed Guy to me. Julie then asked me what I had in mind for a new Green Lantern. I said it'd be nice to have a Green Lantern who shows up and perhaps is a little more adventurous, someone who could really take over and who could really be an interesting character. I said, let me just ask you a question, Julie. If you were to do another Green Lantern, do you think you would make him a white guy? Julie said, yes, he thought so, to sell comics. Why are you asking? I said, well, you have a Green Lantern who came to Earth, a bin sewer, and he was going to die, so he sent out the ring, and the ring was to find the most noble and bravest guy on Earth to become Green Lantern. Presumably the Green Lantern Corps is able to do this. They can find the best candidate on any given planet, and the ring found Hal Jordan. It makes sense to me that it would find Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan was a test pilot who, under various people's tutelage, seemed to be a pretty good fella. Then the ring went out and found a replacement for Hal, and it turned out that this replacement, Guy Gardner, happened to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant gym teacher.
Yep.
Now this has to be straining the edge of credulity, that the second best guy on Earth to become a Green Lantern is a white guy. I personally had a little problem with this Guy Gardner fella already. It seemed to me that if the ring was going out a third time, I don't think it's going to find a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant guy. It's going to find an Oriental guy or a black guy? Neal's words. The gist of my question to Julie was, can't we find a black Green Lantern? Julie, overpowered by awfully obvious logic, said, all right, I'll talk to Denny. Neal's then asked, what were your thoughts when you read the script that Denny wrote to introduce John Stewart?
Right.
Troubled. I got the first pages of the script, and the story was originally about this fellow named Lincoln Washington.
Oh dear.
I went to Julie and said, I'm having a little trouble with the name. Julie, in his gentleman's innocence, asked why. I said, Julie, that's a slave name.
Yes.
I don't think you could find a more slave name than Lincoln Washington.
Yeah.
There were black guys in America who were changing their names to Muslim names to avoid slave names. I explained. Julie asked me what I thought his name ought to be. I said, I don't know if you want to go the Muslim thing, but just give him a regular name like John Stewart. That'd be a really good name. I had originally asked that he be made an architect and be given a profession that anyone who is black would look at and say, yeah, I could buy that. So, yeah, originally Lincoln Washington.
That's
And Neal Adams said,
awful.
nope, John Stewart. And
I'm glad you did, Neal Adams. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
I seem to remember John being involved in a couple of early issues, maybe one issue of the late 90s JSA series. Pretty sure there's a conversation with him and Sand in one issue I think that's when he was in a wheelchair and he was doing his architect bit and helping them build new headquarters.
Oh, yes. That's familiar.
Yeah, I mean, Neil's absolutely right. If Peter and I are both Legion of Superheroes fans, and it's one of these things, some people might say that it's white privilege, but you grow up, you just read things as they are and you take them as they are. And I remember having an almost sort of epiphany moment a couple of years ago when I was reading an old Legion of Superheroes story. It was a really early one. And you realise for this utopian future, 1,000 years in the future, there's an awful lot of white faces. Yeah. And then there's the creation of the character Tyrock, which I think is a little heavy-handed. Yeah. But you sort of think about it now, like, because I remember there was a few sort of raised eyebrows when Michael Bendis launched his recent Legion of Superheroes because he racially flipped a few characters. And to me that made perfect sense because the melting pot is just going to continue for the next 1,000 years, and it makes sense that, you're going to see a more racially diverse group of superheroes. I mean, on the one hand, you could look at Legion and go, oh, it is diverse because there's someone with blue skin and someone with green skin. Yeah. But it's shocking to think that Legion was about for a good 15 years or so before there was the first black character. So when you think about that sort of stuff, the creation of John Stewart is brilliant. It's again, a lot of it would just be the people who were writing the comics just doing what they knew. But then I think that Denny and Neal, and I suppose Julie, if he was editor, I think that's to be applauded for taking this step. Yeah. Because it's a good bit of representation. And if it makes a few people think and reconsider their attitudes, which I'm sure it must have done, then hopefully, fantastic. Hopefully, yeah. I hope we don't sound too sanctimonious.
No, and I seriously hope no one's offended by anything we've said during this because it is quite a very sensitive topic.
Yes, but we are celebrating Green Lantern's legacy by highlighting this very important character. And, I've seen a lot of chat about how important John was and what a slight it was when the DC universe was rebooted in the New 52 series and they didn't take the opportunity to have John as the Green Lantern in the Justice League. And you sort of think, yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's good that things have improved. More reflective of the world that we actually live in, really. And that's good. That's always going to be good. Like, as I said earlier on in the episode, when we get to Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's John that's going to be the main man. And he'll be really involved at the start of it and throughout. So, he will be back.
Yes. Shall we have a wee look now at the reader response
I think
to
we
this
should.
story then?
I'm very interested to see what it is.
We'll jump ahead to issue 89, the final one of this run, to Green Lantern's mail shoots.
That's the one with the guy being crucified on the aeroplane engine, listeners, if you want a shortcut.
If you want to know the other sort of stories that we're doing at this time.
There's a nice Alan Scott reprint from 1949 at the back. But yes, the letters page, quite chunky. We'll just dive straight in. Dear Editor, a letter of comment to Green Lantern / Green Arrow is no simple chore or pleasure, rather, this late in the game. Everything has been said. The relevance of the series, which I would rather call pertinence, has been exclaimed over and praised. The quality of the artwork has been exclaimed over and praised. GLGA has been exclaimed over and praised time and again in the dozen issues since the two characters got together. Each new issue inspires the same general comments. Neal Adams captures reality as no other artist in the field dares, and we should have said, how nice to do a Neal Adams illustrated story again. It was absolutely incredible.
Yes,
And Denny O'Neil is the best writer in comics, as good as in the medium as Norman Mailer is in his. And I'm not putting a typical Guy Lillian hysterical exaggeration there, I mean it. GLGA is almost without peer. It's changed the face and dream of comics magazines, and so forth and so on. It has all been said before. Time for another collection of linked superlatives to GLGA for its 12th issue this time. Beware my power. Like Snowbirds Don't Fly, the superb dope story that preceded this unlucky yarn, unlucky because I had to follow Snowbirds, I think the introduction of John Stewart will provoke a mess of inferior imitating work throughout the comic periphery. This is the usual response of comicdom to an outstanding, unique story. Relevance has been shoved down the throat of fandom since GLGA's success, never with 1/10 the care and maturity of even the least of the Denny O'Neil Adams stories. It is the price we pay for excellence. While there had been superheroes before, none have talked like black men. None have convinced me for one moment they were anything more than some quasi-liberal comic writer's guilt trip on hip pills. Stewart did. Thank heaven that O'Neil didn't make him a Vietnam vet. Interesting, given what we were saying about the home marine thing, yeah. Most of the Nam vets comics have shown us have been black, and what sorry evidence of class consciousness bubbling from what artists' heads is that? No, Stewart is an architect, a nice touch. I've known guys like that, so I can believe Stewart. I surely believe the environment depicted by Adams, no one can depict the real world as well. Splitting the GLGA team doesn't really sit well with me, though the second story, Green Arrow solo starring in What Can One Man Do, made it with me by artful brevity and style. Elliot Maggin, whoever he is, has done a fine job. And what stylish work by Adams. Special attention should be given to the splash panel, blah, 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 blah. Compares it to Jack Kirby, etc. We didn't read that story, because obviously just all on his own. That letters from Guy H. Lillian III, Kenner, Ellie. We have had letters from him before, I'm sure.
Have, yes, prolific letterhack.
Short editorial response to that.
More about whoever he is, Maggin, later on. But right now, a cold shoulder treatment at Critical Variants with that of our favourite Guy. And the next letter says, Dear Editor, it is a truism of the comics, again, industry.
Yeah, I'm refusing to read comics with an X. I'm just reading comic, frankly.
It is a truism of the comics industry that the inclusion of ethnic characters does not affect sales. Therefore, we must assume that when Denny O'Neil introduces a black character named John Stewart in the latest Green Lantern, his motives are altruistic rather than sordidly capitalistic. Unfortunately, it is a sort of half-hearted altruism of the type which characterises white Americans' attitude towards black people. The fact is that of the more than 20 superhero comics on the stands today, not one of them features a solo black protagonist. Black characters, when they are used, are invariably in the shadow of a white mentor. Interesting. Beware My Power is no exception. The Green Lantern of each planet, it seems, must have a standby to take his place if he is incapacitated. Hal Jordan's second is injured, and a new one must be chosen. The choice is John Stewart's, a black out-of-work architect. He is flippant and angry about America's social oppression of his people. By rather tortuous and contrived means, writer O'Neil gives Stewart the victory in this morality play of political racist machinations. But the fact remains that he is in Hal Jordan's shadow, and in this O'Neil echoes the sentiments of white middle-class Americans. Sure, they say to the black man, we'll let you use our restrooms and eat in our restaurants. We'll even give you your own power ring. But black people are not, it seems, to take the limelight as strong characters. This was the message of Fred Hampton's death, and it is reflected in the fact that the John Stewarts of the comics industry, no matter how young and angry they are never more than incidental secondary characters. And that's from Juan Cole, Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois.
That's a brilliant letter, frankly.
Yes.
We did some editing there on some of the language. Again, we're trying to be as sensitive and careful as we can.
Yes, stuff that was written 50 years ago, you can't really say these days.
Yeah. But he's right. It's like, as I said a minute ago, it would have been nice if they'd had the balls just to make John the headliner in the full-time Green Lantern and maybe have Hal be critically injured or something.
As we said, it was cancelled before, it went on. He went into a backup in The Flash for a while, and you can't introduce really a new character.
But the thing is, that's a good point you make. It became a backup strip in The Flash, and some of the stories were done by the same people that were doing this, but just we didn't see John. It's almost tokenistic in a way. It's only the fact that John came back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And has maintained and endured since then. Because I think he appears once in the whole of the 1970s. It's Juan is making a really good point there. It's a long time before we see a full-time black DC superhero.
Sure.
The next letter, Dear Editor, got the new GLGA today, and I must say I like it. It seems strange to say that, since I thought I'd never like Denny O'Neil's relevance kick, but I must say it. Let me be a bit clearer. I get no thrill watching intergalactic trials that are supposed to parallel the worst publicity-spawned aspects of Right Here on Earth trials. I shed no tears when Green Lantern is asked, what have you done for the Blackskins? His answer should have been, I've saved the world a couple of dozen times, now flake off. And I can only cringe when I see an otherwise excellent editor run a drug story that implies belief in the off-debunked theory that grass leads to H. By 87, you've pulled it out. I like it. There's no crying for causes here. There's not a word of preaching. There's no far-fetched situation set up to make a point. There is a real situation, one I can sympathise with. I've been hassled by the law a couple of times myself, but I can defend myself by pulling my mild-mannered reporter's press card and asking the cop his name. More important, there's a man in there I like. GL snap judgment that he's got a chip on his shoulder may or not be correct. It depends on whether you like cop number 1 or cop number 2 better. Yes, indeed, I'll go so far as to say that Jon Stewart is the best character you've ever introduced in the Green Lantern series, and that includes Hal Jordan. Keep him the way he is. Don't mess with his head as you go along. Particularly, don't make him another Falcon. But let him keep in mind his parting words. Style isn't important, any more than colour. And then, I'm going to read this because it's interesting. As to Green Arrow, I'm not wild over the idea of making him mayor of Star City, but the thing is, its points. Mainly, he's needed a personal life since forever. A stereotype Bruce Wayne analogue isn't it. A character we never practically see outside of that green costume isn't it, even if the character has a girlfriend. With an important position that you can really get into, we might just get an idea of who Oliver Queen is. Who is Elliot Magan? Mike Friedrich? Oh, they're in different leagues, if you ask me. That letter's from Donald D. Markstein, New Orleans. We've had letters from him before, I think.
Yep.
A big long editorial response is mainly concerned with explaining that Elliot Magan is not Mike Friedrich.
No.
Nothing too much about the Jon Stewart story, really, but a little chat about the Ollie Queen story. And then there's one more letter.
There is indeed, and it goes like this. Dear editor, how do you give a standing ovation in a letter? Well, I guess you'd have to imagine the applause and encore. You'd better watch out, though. You're making even the best of DC's other magazines look mediocre. Incredible was the only word to describe your maintenance of this level of excellence. 3 pages of letter of comment writers can't be wrong. Since it would be hard to start the discussion of issue 87 with the best or worst contribution, I guess I'll have to start at the beginning. Beware My Power played in all aspects like a great movie. It is hard again to choose the best part, but in no way trying to diminish the contribution of the illustrious illustrators, I'd say that Mr. Denny O'Neill's script stands out. Starting with the opening sequence of Guy Gardner in the aftermath of the earthquake, the premise is carefully built in all aspects of the past legend. Then we are introduced to Jon Stewart. His role is in no way obvious from the introduction. Is he hero or anti-hero? Wild-eyed or deservedly bitter? He plays with his power at first, misusing it somewhat, again bitter, but in a short time able to think on his feet in the position of a superhero. He seems to be quite fearless, and boy is he honest. And the rest of his letter is taken up talking about the subsequent stories in the issue, and that's from Bob Abrahams from Reggio Park, New York.
No editorial response to that one, so that is where we leave it. Listeners, where did you first encounter Jon Stewart? What do you think of this story? Did we do a reasonable job? Let us know.
Yes, please do. If you want to write to us, you can email us at theearth2podcast@gmail.com. Make sure you follow us on social media, because I'll be putting up some lovely bonus content for this and indeed every episode. On Facebook and Instagram, we're at the Earth 2 Podcast, and on Twitter, we're at podcast_Earth2, and it's the number 2 for all of our social media.
As I always say at this point, if you'd like to leave us a positive review somewhere, that would be lovely. If you'd like to go to our coffee page and buy Peter the price of a beverage like Chuck did, that would be amazing.
Thanks, Chuck. That was fantastic. Thank you. I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, be sure to check out the bonus features. I've assembled a Jon Stewart gallery. I've assembled a few other covers that homage the cover to issue 87. Found the original cover for 87 and the original cover for 87 and the original art for 88. So they'll all be flying up onto the socials, amongst other things.
You've been busy.
Yeah, well, this all been worked out for months in advance. Months and months. There are some foreign reprint covers that popped on day recording, popped up my time up, that I've now had on my phone for 2 years, and I probably won't end up posting for at least another 2 or 3 years. In some cases in the podcast. So there we go.
This is the level of research we do for you.
Welcome to my world. We will give another quick mention to Ross from Stop Let's Team Up, because he started a new dedicated Starman podcast called Opal City Confidential. I have had the honour of guest appearing on episode 2 to talk about the Starman of 1951. So listeners, we would encourage you to check that out if you're a fan of the aspect of DC Comics that deals with legacy. Ross is a lovely guy. He's very supportive of us, so we'd encourage you to check out his podcasts.
Absolutely, without a doubt. And on that note, I've been Peter.
I've been David. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you very soon on
the Earth 2 Podcast.
Transmatter cube activated. Return coordinates set for Earth
crime.
I did not take a big enough breath before I started that.
I heard that rumour.
I started it.
Maybe he's brave, honest, and he has the right kind of mind, but it's obvious he also has a chip on his shoulder the size of the rock of...